as I grew up, I slowly realized that it's not about forcing my mind to shut down, but more to recognize it and let it free flow of a river or like a breeze so that I'm not stuck in my thoughts. I am more than my thoughts. I'll let them pass.
So I would say mindfulness is first related to self-awareness. So when a leader comes and, for example, if anyone that I coached would begin to blame the external world or think that something else or someone else is responsible for what is happening in their life, they are stuck. And the role of a mindfulness practitioner or a coach is to bring that curiosity and let that question say, who am I becoming as I am facing this situation? Sometimes we think that we are in a space where we got it all, but we are actually stuck in a well. And what mindfulness offers us is to begin to see different scenarios, that there is more to what we can perceive.
Stories and Stanza is a podcast exploring creativity, resilience, and the transformative power of human stories. Through our two series, Between the Lines with creators and Fail With Me focusing on wellness and life's challenges, we bring you authentic conversations with inspiring voices from around the world. If you are drawn to meaningful dialogue that both comforts and challenges, follow us on YouTube or any podcast platform. Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of Stories and Stanza, and today we are joined by our guest Dalida. Hi Dalida, welcome to Stories and Stanza.
Hello, Abhra. Very nice to meet you and to join your listeners as well.
Thank you for taking the time. We are on different side of our Saturdays, I believe. My afternoon and early morning for you. And I always find this very interesting when I speak to someone who is other side of the day. Sometimes it is my morning and their evening, and that makes it very interesting with the level of energy we bring in the conversation. So, for anyone who has joined us for the first time, very briefly, in Stories and Stanza, you will find two series. One is called Between the Lines, where I speak to writers about their craft, and Fail With Me, where you will find mental health awareness, mindfulness, emotional intelligence, self awareness. And this is an unscripted conversation. We are looking forward to talk about mindfulness from different perspectives, and I hope you will like the discussion today. So, to get started, Dalida, could you tell us a little bit about yourself for our listeners and viewers?
Yes, I'm also just wondering if you hear me better. I just realized maybe this microphone is a little bit better than what I had
Yeah, I can
a
hear you.
moment ago. Yeah, okay, perfect. And I'm currently based in Serbia, so yes, it's early morning for me. I lived in Asia. I actually lived in China for 30 years. And then a year and a half ago, I came back to Europe. And before that, I went to Thailand. So I traveled around, but Asia is very close to my heart. I'm very much connected with the culture. I had, I began to explore some health practices in China, like internal martial arts, traditional Chinese medicine. And then I had an Indian teacher with yoga. He helped me a lot when I was going through depression and pranayama practices and so on. So all of those personal practices I used to manage my stress in my life, in my professional life. I went to China because I ran away from war. while it was happening here. It used to be Yugoslavia at that time. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
And it was really hard to find my place in China. At that time, I didn't go because I had a job or anything like that. I went with really limited amount of resources and didn't have a place to stay. It took me maybe 6 years to find a proper job, and there was a lot. I was in my early 20s, very much inspired to make change in the world, right? And then life started to hit me. So when you mention about talking about failure and vulnerability, I it was that phase in my 20s that I learned a lot how to bring resilience and what to do to manage my physical and mental health. And then how to manage success, because at certain point success started to happen, and then I thought there what it was, I was on the top of the world, and then realized, well, once when you're on the top you also go down. So the waves of life happened, and I learned new practices. That's where mindfulness really came into my life, and understanding how I can shift my mind into frantically going from fear of the past and fear of the future into the present moment. And then I began to bring all of that into my professional life and start to teach it. I'm an executive coach, so I bring a lot of these skills into my work with executives, with leaders. And I'm in a new phase of life now, coming back to Europe, which is a challenge on its own. I'm having a reverse culture shock because a lot of things are familiar to me, but because I disconnected with it for 30 years, it's very interesting to observe how I reconnect with my roots. So these are kind of like some stages of life that I can uh, share personally of what's been going on with me. Professionally, I worked with various multinational companies in China, like Google, Volkswagen, Johnson and Johnson, and helping their executives make sense of the enormous change that China was going through. Because in the end, it's basically we all are learning how to manage change, I believe.
Thank you for sharing that. And we look forward to understand your work and your concepts on mindfulness for leadership and how that becomes a crucial component of leadership. But before that, since you traveled a lot and you have spoken with people in different culture and different walks of life, and I wanted to hear, how did you perceive the concepts of mindfulness from all these different cultures? Why I am asking that is, probably if you ask what is mindfulness to different people, you will possibly get different answers. And I'm trying not to say that there is only one right answer. I am trying to understand that how does this speak to you through different cultures, since you have traveled extensively and worked in different geographies.
Thank you for that question. I think that there are maybe different layers on how I could answer it, but so I'll try to be as brief and as to the point as I can. So, while living in Asia, the concept of mindfulness was very, very familiar because there's a lot of presence of the Buddhism, and it comes, the roots of mindfulness are in Buddhism. So, while working in China, in a way, the obstacle was, are you bringing the religion in? And really wanting the secular aspect of that. And soon I learned that actually mentioning the word mindfulness was not so important. What people really want is to feel better. And while bringing mindfulness to executives, it was more about, would you be interested to explore what it means to bring your mind into the present moment? And when introducing the practice, when the curiosity would come, what was that? What was this practice about? Then mentioning, well, there is a practice of mindfulness. If you're curious to know more about it, here are the resources. Eventually, I opened the Beijing Mindfulness Center, so then it became very obvious, right? And the field of mindfulness is also going through stages. It used to be like, what is this? How do we translate the word mindfulness as well? In every different country, the same question comes up. How do you answer the word itself? And in many cultures, the word remains the same, mindfulness, just like in English. So then the next phase, maybe from just before COVID 2015 or so, people were more and more familiar with the concept of mindfulness and wanted to find out how can they feel better and manage stress. And it became a skill to help individuals manage their own stress, manage their own view of the reality. And in a way, I think that the secular field of mindfulness made a shift in the wrong direction. But it's not that we learn from failing, right? So it's basically mindfulness was almost presented as a way to strengthen the individual. You will be more resilient, you will have better leadership skills, you will be able to manage stress. And then after maybe even some years of practicing, people were realizing something was off. I was not really getting all of that because mindfulness is not a skill pill. It's not something you learn and then you can do it. It's not like a language. Well, I have these, I know 500 words or 3,000 words, and I have these skills. It's something that is ongoing. It's like a breath. It's like food, right? Like we need to eat every day, otherwise we are not going to feel well, even if we know how to eat properly, what kind of diet we need. So the field of mindfulness is entering a phase where we are more courageous to mention that without compassion, mindfulness is somehow not quite complete. And then another aspect is without the community, it's also really not complete. So it's coming closer to actually original roots of mindfulness, where it was mindfulness is awareness, it's part of the practice. What we need is also the teaching, the understanding of what the practice is about, and we really need a community. If we don't practice together, when we remain alone, mind is again going to take us for a ride, as one could say. So I learned all of that through the process of over 10 years of being in Asia and really being a certified mindful self-compassion teacher and starting my own coaching school as well, teaching leaders and people from various fields on how to combine coaching and mindfulness. And now being back in Serbia, I feel like I'm even maybe back one phase where it's even educational. What is the word mindfulness? What does that mean? And a little bit of a similar perspective. Are you bringing something from the East? Well, we have our own spiritual practice. Christianity is more taking roots, and it's just needing to be very careful to adjust it to the culture that is bringing the learning about how useful this is for the humanity beyond any other concept where we can put it. So I'm also beginning a project, an organization. We are just founding mindfulness in the region. So mindfulness for all ex-Yugoslavia countries, where we are looking into promoting it in local languages because not everyone speaks English. So yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Yes, thank you for explaining that and the challenge around it. And I'll just give a little bit more context to why I was asking that, because in the podcast, this podcast where in the Fail With Me segment that I run, I often try to explore the conditioning aspects of mind, that we grow up with so much conditioning that at some stage we need to work through understanding what part of it is really me and what part of it is some external conditioning. And why I asked you the question, it goes back to growing up. I was told that mindfulness is about controlling your thoughts, like shutting down your mind and just stay quiet. And for the longest time I struggled with that definition because I felt it's not possible. Like, maybe then I thought maybe this is not for me. But as I grew up and I slowly realized that it's not about forcing my mind to shut down, but more to recognize it and let it flow, like a free flow of a river or like a breeze, so that I'm not stuck in my thoughts. I am more than my thoughts. I'll let them pass. It is that moment of cognition with my feelings, my emotions, my randomness, my fear, my darkness, whatever I want to call it, and not labeling them in good or bad, but see all thoughts from a fulcrum of peace. That is what balances everything. So I'm not holding on to my thoughts, I am letting it go. And it took me many, many, many years to properly understand what mindfulness is and how I can practice it. Which is why I was asking you about that, and thank you for sharing that background with me. And I'll take that cue and go into my next question is, you said it beautifully. A lot of people question this. What is mindfulness? What are you trying to bring in? And then there are the there are conceptual aspects of it, but then people see it in light of religion and culture and such things, right? So there are all these barriers of understanding and accepting mindfulness. And I wanted to hear from you that you have worked with many people in this space, with big companies and leadership. What do you see as some of the key challenges of understanding what mindfulness is? And then we will maybe transition into the definition and acceptance and inner work.
Well, I think that you already mentioned the key obstacle is the mind. And interestingly, we call it mindfulness, but it has a different connotation. I think it's really about the first step. It works beautifully for people who are curious and interested in self-awareness, understanding of who am I and realizing that there is no one answer. The moment when we get stuck with one answer, we limit ourselves. And mindfulness offers that width of perspective. Storytelling is a very powerful way to bring certain concepts. And as you were sharing your story, and you said it took me many, many years, and I'm saying, well done for staying on the path, because I think it takes everyone a lifetime. We will not know the full answer at any moment when we think we got it. It's end of the story, end of the practice. So that element of curiosity, of wanting to explore how it presents itself in the next moment, in the next situation, is crucial in bringing it into personal and professional life, and then allowing that awareness to guide us in wisdom of making choices. So I would say mindfulness is first related to self-awareness. So when a leader comes, and for example, if anyone that I coached would begin to blame the external world or think that something else or someone else is responsible for what is happening in their life, they are stuck. And the role of a mindfulness practitioner or a coach is to bring that curiosity and let that question say, who am I becoming as I am facing this situation? In order to practice that on micro level, the question of who am I becoming as I'm taking the next breath, this breath, and this breath, and realizing that we are becoming with every single breath. If we manage to come to that curiosity, we be, begin to be liberated from certain expectations that we have to do, think things, and make life in any way. And it becomes like a game, like a curious game. Now, so I'll go back to the storytelling. There's this really interesting story about a frog that was in a well, and there was another frog sitting on the top of the well and asking the one in the well and saying, "Hey, who are you?" And the frog in the well said, "I'm the king of the well. Look at my kingdom. It's like these walls and this water, and I can go deep. I am the king of this well." And then the frog on the top of the well just looked outside, and the story can just end there. And if we bring the curiosity on what is the different perspective between two frogs, this is what the mind actually sometimes presents us. Sometimes we think that we are in a space where we got it all, but we are actually stuck in a well. And what mindfulness offers us is to begin to see different scenarios, that there is more to what we can perceive. When we engage in daily practices, the mind begins to be trained to actually offer these new perspectives on its own. And we somehow begin to expand our view, and then the frog in the well and the frog on the top of the well will be making completely different choices. Don't you agree?
Absolutely, yes. And I love that perspective that you brought in. This is beautiful. And I often say this in this podcast is that unless you have self awareness, you have a very limited vision of the world. And self awareness is the opposite end of the spectrum where you can see everything. The more you expand your mind, the more you see. And then you'll realize that if you are feeling hurt or upset, sad by anything, it really is a very small part within you. When you have self awareness, you possibly cannot be hurt because you have opened your mind and you have that clarity that makes life very different than it used to be. So I can completely see the beauty in
Mm.
it.
Can I add something,
Yes, please.
Abra, just
Yeah.
now that we are mentioning awareness? Because it's very important to also understand that awareness is not the end. It's not the, as we would say, goal of the practice. It's part of the practice. So if we imagine that we are doing the practice and awareness is coming in and I'm understanding who I am, it's like filling the cup with water drop by drop. So each thought, each breath, each awareness of coming, understanding that we cannot control the mind, that the mind is coming and going, and that's just how it is, and it's not useful or healthy even to block the thoughts because they will explode at certain point if the stress is higher. But if we only stay at the point of awareness, it's a little bit like we are filling that cup with water, and then when we stop with the practice, we don't drink it. We don't drink the water. So drinking the water would actually mean going out in the world and acting. We need to bring action, mindful action into the perspective, and to also learn that who am I becoming through acting in the world, for the world, and what am I learning through that? So without that, somehow the picture doesn't become really complete. And this is why I love to work with leaders, because leaders have that natural tendency to go and act out in the world, for the world. And when the mindfulness is actually the space where they can pause and go through that awareness, there's no question that they are going to go and bring it out. So in a way, it's easier to work with leaders. But for a lot of practitioners, I realize that at times it becomes a little bit of expectation that now that I know myself, I will be able to manage the stress and I will never be stressed ever again. And that is, of course, false expectation. I can't say that I wasn't trapped with that as well. So it happened to me also. So I just want to bring that in so people have clarity about that.
Yes, absolutely. The way I have seen it affect me in my life is that when I have awareness about something, I totally agree that that's not the end because this goes in layers and layers and layers, and then we need to keep at it. And sometimes some of these patterns exist for years. I can say that I want to unlearn them, but in practice, that might take longer. And then when you reach that layer, it probably doesn't stop there. Then you are curious about another bigger vision, and then you need to work through it. And you mentioned something about mindfulness and skill, and I have another interesting pointer to bring in, and I'll tell you what I want to ask you next is, as I was saying initially, that I have two segments in the podcast. One, I talk about writing and creativity, and another, I talk about well being and mental health. And when I started off in this podcast, then they were like two sort of branches of a tree, that this is something I like to talk about and I will let it grow. I never thought that why I did it. I thought they were like two branches. And after doing this for a very long time, I realized I'm not doing two different things. I'm doing the same thing. I'm connecting the emotional presence of that moment, and I'm connecting that to creativity, because to be creative you have to be present and you have to have that clarity. So essentially I'm talking about the same core message, but maybe the outlets are slightly different. It goes into different avenues, but at the core is the same thought. And I loved that, you mentioned that mindfulness is a skill, and then we exercise it, we action upon it. And that is where I wanted to get into. What are some of your thoughts that you would think would be beneficial for our listeners today?
Well, I will, like I think that currently the world is having a collective stressor, like globally. It doesn't matter which country we are from. We can, we are probably dealing with very similar underlying baselines. So I would just address that actually, why would someone want to practice mindfulness? Often is because they're facing some life challenges and realizing I really need to adjust the way I'm thinking, being, and so on. And when I'm very close to Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanh's practice. So I went to Plum Village in Thailand and in France a couple of times, and I was asking them, how do they actually deal with these life pressures? What kind of practice? And we can say that anxiety is really shared state of being, probably for many of us, and probably all those who are listening to this podcast. And they said, often we think that we need to sit and meditate. But sit and meditate when you are feeling stronger in yourself, when you're having like inner core and feeling you want to go deeper into awareness. If you're feeling strong, a little bit stronger emotion like anxiety or sadness or feeling upset, then go for a walk. Meditate while you're walking. But if you're feeling really strong emotions like anger and anxiety is so strong that you're maybe shaking, then meditate, go to run, get that energy of that emotion out. So there's so many different ways that we can practice. And it's important to know that for those who are maybe exploring it as part of their life, whatever we practice, maybe at certain point also there is a boredom that we face as part of the practice, and that's the time to change and explore something new, to learn something about the practice. So when we are talking about the skill of mindfulness, it's so challenging to say, well, just sit and focus on your breath. Is essentially yes, that's the answer, but it really depends where we are at the practice, right? Like, are we just beginning with the practice? Are we just getting familiar with our mind? Are we somewhere where we already are feeling the benefits of that? Or are we already somewhere where we passed different phases? And in practice of mindful self-compassion, we say that there are three ways of approaching practice. One is striving. It's the part when we are like, wow, this is really working well. And if I just sit longer or do more, or if I'm making sure that I have hours behind me, right? Like when I practice, that's called striving. I'm really at it. I'm determined, I'm passionate, I'm disciplined. It's very important part of the practice. But then at certain point we come to the disillusionment part, disillusionment phase, and we can see it as a spiral maybe. And disillusionment phase is when the practice is going to give us a proof that it's not working, right? No matter how much I practice, I still have anxiety. I still have, I am still upset. I still have my thoughts. I still have thoughts explaining the reality in a way that is not helpful, and so on. And at that time, people often decide, oh, this is not working. It's a really important stage of the practice itself and the way how we are building skills. So the third approach to the practice is radical acceptance. You already mentioned the word that we are going to explore it. And radical acceptance is the phase when, even though I'm putting all this time into practice, I'm reading the material, I'm talking to people, I'm showing up, I am still a human. Having emotions is human. I'm still going to be dissatisfied, and I still might have depressive thoughts. I may come to the parts of me that are going to reveal something that I'm not happy with. I don't know. Like, is that awareness? I'm having awareness of having maybe some violence inside. It's like, no, 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 that's not me. But when we come to the radical acceptance and realizing, and we can hold that and warm, I believe that there will be a major shift in humanity, that we are going to be really able to hold that space for each other. Because ultimately, when we begin to see each other as humans, I think we can really have peace in the world and deal with conflicts in a different way. Yeah.
I really liked how you mentioned the stressors, and no matter where we are, the stressors are affecting us. And with the stressors, there is this aspect of change management also that you told us about. And I wanted to hear your views on when this is so hard and then everything is changing. What is the starting point one can look for? Because they cannot immediately be the frog outside the well. When I anything that I have learned, it has taken me a lot of mistakes and a lot many years. And this is something. This is the core theme of the podcast. Is I talk about failure, as in create that acceptance of failure, create that compassion, and removing the guilt and shame for it. And to me, that is the stepping stone for self awareness. And I wanted to hear from your point of view that we are talking about reaching a stage where mindfulness becomes our skill, and it is where we action our leadership capabilities. And whether we are talking about someone in a corporate, but every person in their life is leader of something. So the concepts that we are talking about is kind of same, whether we are talking about it at a individual level or collective level or leadership level, right? So I wanted to hear your thoughts around that. We are under this many stresses, we are in demanding jobs, we are in the pressure of, let's say, parenting, then relationships, and the dynamics of friendship and colleagues, and then there is a news and inflation, and everything around us is stressor, and then it is constantly sort of urging us to have that dopamine kick all the time, that we need to pump ourselves with more and more stresses. Nothing is saying that let it go. We instead are saying pump in more stressor. So staying at that point, how does the first chapter of mindfulness look like?
I think that first chapter is different for every single person. And like if we imagine that we are writing a story about our life, it's basically what is the first sentence, what is the title of the book? Uh, or the story or that chapter that we are writing. So maybe we can say, I stepped into mindfulness because there was depression that showed up in my life. So the depression was the entry point. And in depression, it was really important that I learned the difference of my mind being in the past or future or the present moment. I really struggled to do it until I realized that I could focus on the sounds in the present moment because I'm auditory. Until I learned that practice, I was really struggling. The concept is so simple. Just come to the present moment. But we have different ways of coming to the present moment, and just understanding what the present moment means is going to be different for different people. So one way for those who are beginning would be for 30 seconds, I mean for 10 seconds if you manage, to really listen to the sounds and notice which side they come from, left or right, far or near, how many are there. So all of that could support one to actually remain present. So that would be one way. Another one would be to feel the smell. Sometimes people burn incense. The smell is a very powerful way to come back to the present moment. And when we notice that the mind is suddenly creating the story about, oh, what do I need to do next? Or what happened a minute ago or yesterday? And I'm like, oh, smell, and come back to the present moment. And not to judge ourselves that the mind is jumping away out of the smell. So that's another way. So it's basically through our senses that we bring presence through our senses. Another one is, it could be with mindful eating. For some people, that is really helping. Like set up a timer for 3 minutes. And when you take the bite, feel the texture, chew a little bit longer instead of 1 or 2 bites, times of chewing. Maybe it's just feel the spices that were in the dish. It's amazing Indian food as well that can be, and even with rice, or a lot of times we use raisin because it has like that dry texture, but it reveals the sweetness afterwards. So this is for people who are really connected with eating. It's going to be easier for them to do that. Another way is to maybe find an object, a precious stone, or just a rock, or something that is dear to you, you can carry in your pocket and then touch it. So that would be a kinesthetic invitation to come to the present moment. So something that already feels good. At any point when person is feeling that they are forcing their way into presence, we are maybe doing a little bit more harm. My way of going into the practice was forcing myself to sit for 45 minutes because I was instructed to do it that way. And there are some practices that are going to suggest that. I believe in more compassionate way where we can navigate and say there's enough stress, enough pain in life. Why make, let's make the practice the time where we are going to savor the moment. And if we can savor the moment of curiosity and playfulness, it's like, oh, look, I never even heard that there's a clock on the wall. Or like, oh, that's how the AC or a fan sounds like. Or, wow, it's so interesting that my mind is going with a story about the voice I'm hearing outside that is passing, someone is passing by. Or, like, oh, interesting, I feel this object only with tips of my fingers, but not with the palm, right? That awareness is already a great invitation into what the practice might be opening itself um, into deeper awareness, right? And so I used to work with people who have a lot of struggle to sleep, to rest their mind. And sometimes during the session, they would just kind of like lean on their hand. And I would just ask them, so just feel how it is to rest your head on your hand. And I would say, if you feel like you can close your eyes, and at that moment, as they're feeling their head resting on their hand, they would actually fall asleep. And I would just go quiet and let them sleep. And after a minute or two, they would suddenly open their eyes. And I would just say, gentle. Or you can close your eyes again if you feel like. Just notice what is happening. It's like, wow, I'm so relaxed. It's like, feel where relaxation is going. And they would say, well, my shoulders just relaxed. It's like, remember this. So that's the awareness as well, right? For us to learn when we enter the state of mindfulness on how it feels to be relaxed. Because, and to feel that it's safe to be relaxed even when stress is there. So that's how I would introduce it to those who are perhaps using mindfulness as a practice to help them to handle stress and find a space to relax and recharge through nourishing practice of sleep.
I love how you talked about the anchor points. And for me, a lot of my mindfulness moment is usually from walking. And when I started that, I would just think that, oh, how long I have to walk and when do I finish and such things. And when I slowly realized that walking is my anchor point, it reminds me where I am grounded, then I felt I lost track of time. Like sometimes I can walk just for hours, just without thinking anything else. I can just be in that moment. And I love how you explain that it comes very differently to different people. Like it can be mindful eating, it can be a scent that makes you basically touch points with the senses. staying by a lake and then being present in that moment. I absolutely love that. Going back to the core theme that we are discussing today is the mindfulness and leadership. In case of leaders, they are usually very successful people in their lives, and yet they might feel that their achievement is incomplete, like they have everything, yet they'll miss something there, or they're too busy running everything, and then they're not emotionally present through each and every one of them because they are doing so many things. And in that process, it is quite possible that they miss the anchor points. And I wanted to hear your experience working with people so that this could be this could be reckoning for anyone who is listening. They might think that, okay, we are talking about anchor points and we know we have to make a start, but what if I'm, instead of nourishing, instead of grounding, we are so busy in achieving, right? And I wanted to hear your experience working with leaders or successful people or corporate people in that area. And again, of course, this would work very differently for different people. Yeah.
Yes, yes. But I think maybe to bring a general point and how life is amazing, offering us opportunity to learn. Often, these topics come in from different angle, and they will come in through the conflict with a team member or a board member that is actually having a different way. Maybe they're not achieving as much as the leader would want. So they would bring that topic into perspective when I into the session. And so here is the way how I feel like life becomes the teacher. So through awareness of what is happening in a relationship, perhaps they will realize that they've been really not compassionate towards that team member, that they didn't bring leadership skills to motivate the person to understand what they're going through. And then suddenly they can realize, like, wow, actually their family member just passed away, and maybe I just completely neglected the fact that they are having some life stressors, or they just got a newborn child, and I've been expecting that their performance is going to remain the same, right? And in that process of them having compassion for the other being, there's often a self-reflection moment and saying, well, it seems that you're very critical or having high expectations of the other people. So how does that reflect in your inner world? And that's where the invitation for self-awareness comes in, and they begin mindfully to explore. It's like, again, coming to the present moment. It's exploring, like, as I am in a high achieving mode, what kind of posture do I have? How does that feel in my body? So this is the key question in practicing mindfulness, the embodied experience of our awareness. So if I notice that my hyperachiever is having, like or this kind of guard like a fighting, or really tense shoulders that are really high up, or maybe a knot in my belly often is going to come up with some sign where our body is holding that tension. So there's nothing wrong in achieving. But when we are in a hyperachieving mode, when we are not able to relax from that or celebrate, as you mentioned, that we just go from one goal to the other, one goal to the other. I just actually yesterday had a client who's been in a major decided to take multiple tasks for a year, for the past year, and finally the phase is over. So we are now showing up in a session, and I'm thinking we are going to celebrate. The multitasking phase is over. There's, she's taking a break of 1 week. But do you know the first question that she brought to the session was, my mind is just going at me and saying, why didn't I do this? Why didn't so all other things that she wants to achieve next. And we spent 1 hour of helping her to come back to the present moment, reflect on how much she has achieved. And even though cognitively she understands, she didn't have capacity to pause because there's that inertia. For 1 year, she was just moving from one thing to the next, from one thing to the next. Like a marathon runners, often when people who run marathon, when they come to the end line and when they finish, if they stop immediately, they collapse. Their legs can't hold them to stand still. So they need to continue running, but slow down, slow down. And in that slowing down to actually give themselves space to rest. But in a lot of real work situations and life situations, we have a sense that we can't stop. It's not a race, it's not the end goal. It's like there's a next project and the machine is running and we need to keep up and keep up. So where there's no culture in organization also of celebrating, learning from failure, it's really, really difficult to have that sense of how is my mind working and how can I do it alone. But if leaders learn for themselves how to pause, how to manage their hyperachiever, or to drive the external success and personal balance, then they will begin to develop compassion for others, and we will begin to build higher quality organizations. At the moment, also, we are at the big phase of losing jobs. Companies are downsizing, right? So there's a lot of that some people are forced to stop and lose their livelihood. So that is a really, really difficult topic. Professions that are not useful anymore from perspective of humanity. Humans are not as good as robots, as machines, as artificial intelligence. They do it with, if we train them well, they will do it with better output and less emotions, right? So we need to redefine what success means. It's not doing things faster. It's about maybe people like, what would it be if we were to bring a success, definition of success as the quality of human relations, the capacity for us to connect as we are doing something. Can you imagine how workplaces would be if we had that as a definition of success, and how much more quality of decision making, of feeling safe, learning from failure, because we can connect when we fail as well. I don't know if that's idealistic vision of the future, but I do hope that organizations and leaders, through that learning of how to manage their own inertia of these perceived success, can also help others to grow.
Very true. This is the question of the definition of success, and that's something I have questioned for a very long time. That what is success? What are we conditioned to perceive as success, as opposed to do we need to rethink on that definition? And I absolutely loved the example you gave, that holding the stress in our body. And I remember a phase of my life that when I was not sleeping well, when I was not resting well, when I was not digesting well. And it took me some time to understand that the problems I'm facing at the surface, they are not the real problem. The problem is starting at somewhere else, at the deepest core. And we as humans, we say that our memory is in our head, in our mind, but our muscles, our organs, they have a memory and they hold that stress. And gradually, when I started building mindfulness in my life, I felt much lighter, like just like something I'm carrying on my shoulder, like a very heavy backpack. And one day, all of a sudden, that was gone. And then I realized that that is where that tightness, that's something I was holding on for a very long time. And this is something I have noticed a lot of times in people, and now I can tell that whether they are holding on to those emotional patterns or they are choosing to let go. If you are holding on to it and then you are carrying that forward every day, making each step harder and harder to take, and then because every part of your body is somewhere carrying it, it makes it very, very difficult to survive. And then, you start getting bitter, start getting angry. But the root cause is really simple. And I think we have talked about a lot of aspects of mindfulness from the beginning, from practical steps, from being grounded, from understanding our stresses. But I wanted to bring this, maybe summarize the discussion, since we have almost run out of time, that that we are holding on to this to in our body. But if we can bring in some compassion to ourselves, or ourselves and of course around, for people around us, where does that practice begin, and what are the benefits we can start achieving at our own level? And I wanted to hear your thoughts around that. I think that would complete the discussion as well.
Abhra, the body has amazing ways of letting us know how it takes care of us and how compassionate it is if the mind would allow it. So, in a way, when our mind and body begin to work as a team, as a very good team, to realize that we come from different angles, and that each comes from different angles, and each has its own strengths and weaknesses, that we can be complete. And when there's pain in the body, for example, the body will take care of itself naturally. There's something in the practice of mindful self-compassion, we call it soothing touch. You know, if my head, if I have a headache, my hand will naturally go and I will naturally try to massage my temples, right? I don't need to really even think about it. If I hit my elbow, the other hand is going to go on the place where I hit it and just go like, ouch, right? But we do it very short and without awareness. So I would say begin to notice when your body is acting compassionately whenever you feel pain and pause there. So if there's any place of tension in your body, bring the hand over that and notice what is your hand providing for that place. Not because you want the pain to go away, but because the pain is invitation for your presence and kindness. When we get ill, a lot of people, at least in my culture, will criticize themselves of why they allow themselves to become ill. It's like, oh, I was so stupid. I didn't wear a hat. Of course, I got some cold in my head. Or like, how silly of me that I ate that dish and it was not good. So like something happened in my stomach. But if we stop criticizing ourselves and take that these are just elements of life, there's no way to avoid it completely. We do get ill, we do get hurt, and then we learn to offer ourselves kindness and warmth, just like we would take care of a friend when a friend is ill, or a family member, or a child, or a puppy, or our pet, right? Depending on what the context is, someone we really care for. And we want to offer that warmth and kindness and know how to take care of them. When we learn to do that for ourselves, that is the ultimate act of self-compassion. So begin to notice self-compassion. For example, oh, I'm noticing that I'm thirsty. I'll go and get some water. I drink and I say, wow, that was a compassionate act. Notice as the water is coming in, savor it, stay with that moment. That's the mindfulness practice of compassion of the body. When you're walking through nature, you have mindful walking, feel that your feet are connecting with the earth. Notice how it feels to go with each step. Pause. Again, you can use the smell and the eyes, like feel the smell of the trees around you, maybe mango trees in India or, like pine trees in Europe. That moment of pause and the coming back into the body when we are feeling good is then we savor it and let the joy come in. And the moment when we are bringing self-care, when we are not feeling well and offering ourselves kindness and warmth, also knowing when we need to ask for help as well, being okay to ask for help. Um, all of those would be maybe some elements that I would invite everyone to bring into their daily life. Not even call it mindfulness, but to call it ultimate self-care kit, first aid kit that is enabling us to move through life. These are real life skills. And from there, we can explore different ways to deepen that space of compassion and care for the body.
I love that explanation, and I have seen this firsthand in my life. Like, I went to a somatic workshop, and I was able to pinpoint what was troubling me for asthma, and it was kind of challenging me for a very long time. And I thought that, okay, this medication will help, and that medication will probably make me feel better. But when I was, it didn't happen in one day. as I was saying, it took time, but I was able to point what was creating that trouble, and I had a much better relief after that point. And what I think is magical about mindfulness, and people do not often realize that they think it is too hard, but it is very simple. And when we start small, the effects can really magnify. That if we resolve one small tiny problem, it goes back and it kind of starts working on at a deeper and deeper level. And that continuity, that is the beauty. And your mind and body become two best friends, and they work together, and that becomes a success. And I think you talked about it beautifully in today's session. I would love to say to our viewers and listeners on podcast platforms, I hope that this episode spoke to you, and thank you for listening, and thank you, Dalida, for your time and such wonderful heartfelt thoughts on mindfulness. It means a lot to me.
Thank you, Aubrey. It was a real pleasure. Wishing all the best to you and your listeners and your audience.